Australian 20-cent 1976 value. What if a simple Australian 20-cent coin from 1976 sitting in your old collection could be worth much more than its face value? Before you spend it or sell it for a few cents, make sure you check the date, condition, and especially the quality of the coin, because some examples can attract collectors. The Australian 20-cent coin has an interesting history, and the 1976 issue is part of an important period in Australian decimal coinage. Australia introduced decimal currency in 1966, replacing the old pounds, shillings and pence system. The 20-cent coin became one of the regular denominations used in everyday Australian transactions. The 1976 Australian 20-cent coin was struck as part of the normal circulating coinage of the time. It features a platypus on the reverse side, which is one of the most recognizable designs in Australian decimal coin history. The obverse carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. The combination of the Australian platypus design and the portrait of Queen Elizabeth makes this coin especially interesting to collectors who enjoy Australian coins from the early decimal era. The coin is made from copper nickel and has a round shape with a reeded edge. Its standard weight is 5 grams and its diameter is 28.5 millimeters. These specifications are important because they can help collectors identify the genuine coin and distinguish it from damaged, altered, or unusual examples. Now let us talk about value, because this is where many collectors become interested. A normal circulated 1976 Australian 20-cent coin is generally not an extremely rare coin, and its value can be close to its face value depending on condition and the collector market. However, a coin in better condition can be more desirable than a heavily worn example. Condition is one of the biggest factors when determining the value of an Australian 20-cent coin. A coin that has been in circulation for many years may show scratches, marks, dirt, and wear on the platypus and Queen Elizabeth portrait. A coin with strong original details and very little wear can be significantly more interesting to collectors. If you have a 1976 20-cent coin, check the highest points of the design first. Look at the platypus and examine the details around the body and head. Then check the portrait on the opposite side. Look carefully at the hair, facial features and lettering. Strong, sharp details can indicate that the coin has survived in better condition. The edge should also be examined. The Australian 20-cent coin has a reeded edge, and unusual damage around the edge can affect its value. Check for dents, scratches, filing, or signs that the coin has been altered. Another important factor is the overall appearance. Collectors often prefer coins that have attractive original surfaces. Heavy cleaning can actually reduce collector appeal because cleaning may leave scratches or an unnatural shine. If you discover an old coin that looks valuable, it is usually better not to polish it or use chemicals on it. You should also look closely for possible minting errors. Errors can sometimes make ordinary coins much more interesting to collectors. A genuine mint error may involve an unusual strike, double striking, off-center striking, missing design details, or another manufacturing abnormality. But remember that not every strange-looking mark is a mint error. Damage that happened after the coin left the mint is much more common. For example, a scratch caused by another coin or a dent caused by dropping the coin does not normally make the coin rare. A genuine mint error needs to be examined carefully and compared with known examples. The 1976 date itself does not automatically make every Australian 20-cent coin extremely valuable. This is an important point for anyone watching coin collecting videos online. You may see claims that a particular old coin is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, but the actual value depends on rarity, condition, authenticity, variety, and collector demand. If you find a 1976 Australian 20-cent coin in your change or an old collection, do not immediately assume it is worth a fortune. Instead, inspect it carefully and compare it with reliable Australian coin references and recent sales of similar coins. Uncirculated examples can be more desirable because they show little or no circulation wear. Proof or special presentation examples can also have different values from ordinary circulating coins. The exact value depends on the specific type and condition of the coin. One of the best ways to understand the market value is to look at completed sales rather than asking prices. Sellers can list an ordinary coin for a very high price, but that does not mean somebody actually paid that amount. Real completed transactions provide a much better indication of what collectors are willing to pay. The history behind this coin is also worth remembering. During the 1970s, Australia was using its decimal currency system for everyday life, and coins such as the 20-cent piece were handled by millions of people. Because these coins circulated widely, many surviving examples show noticeable wear. That makes high-quality surviving examples more interesting. A coin that was saved instead of heavily circulated can preserve much more of the original design. Collectors often enjoy comparing different grades and seeing how much detail remains after decades. The 1976 Australian 20-cent coin is also an excellent example of how ordinary money can become part of history. When it was first released, it was simply a 20-cent coin used for everyday purchases. Decades later, collectors first check the date and make sure it is actually 1976. Next, examine both sides under good lighting. Look at the portrait, the platypus lettering, and the edge. Check for unusual minting characteristics, but do not mistake normal damage for a valuable error. Then determine the condition. Is the coin heavily worn, or does it still have strong original detail? Does it have scratches, dents, stains, or cleaning marks? These details can make a major difference when comparing it with other examples. Finally, compare your coin with recent sales of similar Australian 20-cent coins. If you believe you have an unusual variety or genuine mint error, you may want to have it examined by an experienced Australian coin dealer or professional grading service. The most important lesson is that age alone does not make a coin valuable. Rarity, condition, demand, and authenticity all matter. A 1976 Australian 20-cent coin can be an interesting collectible even when it is not extremely rare, because it represents an important period in Australia's decimal currency history. So before you throw that old 20-cent coin into a jar or spend it without thinking, take a closer look. The platypus on the reverse, the Queen Elizabeth portrait, the 1976 date, and the condition of the surfaces can tell you much more about the coin than its 20-cent face value. History of the Australian 20-cent 1976 coin. The Australian 20-cent coin has an important place in the history of Australia's decimal currency system. Australia changed from pounds, shillings, and pence to decimal currency in 1966. This major change introduced the dollar and cent system and created a new series of Australian coins for everyday use. The 20-cent denomination was introduced in 1966 and featured a design that has remained one of the most recognizable designs in Australian coinage. The reverse shows the platypus, which is one of Australia's most unique native animals. The obverse of the 1976 20-cent coin carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. During this period, Australian circulating coins carried her portrait because Australia was part of the Commonwealth and she was the reigning monarch. By 1976, Australian decimal coins had already been in circulation for 10 years. The 20-cent coin was commonly used for everyday purchases and was an important part of the country's cash economy. Millions of Australians would have handled these coins in shops, markets, public transport, and other daily activities. The 1976 issue belongs to the early period of Australian decimal coinage. This makes it interesting to collectors because these coins provide a physical connection to Australia's transition into modern decimal currency. The coin was produced in copper nickel and was designed for regular circulation. Its strong construction allowed it to survive many years of everyday use. However, because 20-cent coins were heavily circulated, many surviving examples show scratches, marks, and wear. The platypus design is especially significant because it represents Australian wildlife rather than a traditional royal or political symbol. The design helped give Australia's new decimal coinage a distinctly Australian identity. The 1976 20-cent coin also represents the monetary history of Australia during the 1970s. This was a period when decimal currency had become familiar to the Australian public, but the older pre-decimal coins were still remembered by many people. For collectors today, the coin is interesting not only because of its potential value but also because of its history. Every surviving